just staring at me. I'm trying so hard to make sense of this. Tidal waves, all of my thoughts are washed away again.
Welcome to the mix part of this mini masterclass for a mini song. I will walk you through all the tracks of this session, show you what every plugin does, what automation we used, and uncover everything that we did to make this song sound like it sounds. Let's start with the main master bus, the mix bus, where every signal is eventually ending, and the treatment that I chose to make on this mix bus to let it sound the way it does. The first plugin I have on is a limiter. And as you can see, it's more like a safety net than anything else. It doesn't do anything at all. It's just in case that a peak is going above threshold, it's caught up quickly before going into the next plugins or the next parts of the chain. But in this case, it's really not doing anything at all. Next up is an EQ. I removed a little bit of, 270. Let's listen to what it sounds with, without, and what this range sounds like.
Just staring at me. I'm trying so hard to make sense of.
Okay, this is just cleaning up some, let's call it boxiness or little low mid-range thing. It's just cleaning and clearing up the whole mix. Next up is my analog chain. So I have like 3 pieces of equipment that all my mixes run through all the time. First is a pair of germanium compressors. They don't do a lot. They have like, let me see. Yeah, like 3-4 dB peak reduction, and the mix knob is set to 50% only. So it's really just like 1 or 2 dB of actual compression. But what those nice analog boxes do is they have a sound. So they have like transformers in there where the signal is getting through, adding some harmonics and adding just some nice flavor and glue. All those harmonics, they are like sand in between of the, let's call it the gravel of the individual instruments, and they fill up the voids in between in a very nice and pleasant way. That's why I love to use pieces of equipment that have a coloration to them. The second is a pair of germanium tone control EQs. Those EQs have a low passive section that is something like a Pultec EQ, where you, for example, can boost and cut the same frequency at the same time, giving you like a very special curve. I will show you this effect on another track later. I like to boost a little bit of 110 Hertz. This is the fundamental range of a lot of instruments. The guitars live there, the voice lives there, there is a good portion of the bass living there, and it's where the meat of a mix lies. If this part is solid and strong, it really gives you like a thick mix. And what I'm doing is I'm adding 20K, just a little bit of air, 1 dB, not a lot. No big moves on any of each individual element of this complete chain. And finally, in my analog chain, I have an API 2500. It's a classic compressor, and it's really set to a very, very gentle setting. It's like 1.5 to 1 ratio, so very, very gentle, very slow attack, and a very quick release. So it's really like barely moving at all. It's like 1 dB of compression, but again, it's more the tone of that compressor. So now after this chain, we are back into the computer, and next up is a plugin called Gullfoss. This is like a very gently leveling tool that's leveling out the complete frequency response of any signal that you run through. I have it set in a way that it's barely doing anything. It's like 1 dB or something. So if a part is a little bit too bright, it's just taming ever so slightly. If a part gets a little bit too dark or too boomy, then it's also like pulling down 1 dB or something in the lower register. Next up is yet another EQ. And I love this EQ because it has a really nice sounding high-end shelf. So it's set to 25K, so this is out of the audible range, but since it's a very, very gentle slope, the actual boost is coming slightly into the range that we are able to hear. But it's like not even 1 dB of actual boost, so it's really, really gentle. Next up is yet another EQ, but this one does quite a bit of lifting. When I bought this plugin, I just stepped through presets. I'm not a preset guy, so usually I don't care about presets. I do my own stuff. But I was curious to see what it does, and I stepped through the presets and I came across this dull mix fix preset. And I really loved what it was doing. It's really doing what the name says. When you start with rough signals, everyone who has recorded something knows that if you don't EQ anything at all and add up a ton of tracks, then you have like a little mid-range build-up and it's getting a little bit dull and it's lacking a little bit of excitement. It's kind of a little bit rough and demo sounding. This preset has you covered. If you put this on the main mix right away, everything just pops out a little bit more and sounds a little bit more refined. So if you have this from the start, you don't have to tweak as much on the individual signals because everything is already shining a little bit more. Let's have a listen to what this does.
I'm trying so hard to make sense of this.
This is really gold. If you have this plugin and you struggle to get like a popping bright mix, check this out. Maybe this will help you. Okay, up next is yet another compressor that is also doing barely anything except more sound and character. Let's listen to it.
Just staring at light. I'm trying so hard to make sense of this.
Okay, it's obviously also adding some gain, but the main benefit of this kind of compressor is that it's just gluing everything again a little bit together. It's making like 0.5 dB of gain reduction, but it has a color to it that I really like. Up next is a clipper. Let's see what this does.
Just staring at light. I'm trying so hard to make sense of this. Tidal waves.
Okay, it does two things. First of all, what I did is I used it to pull the gain down a little bit before it's going into the next plugin. That's why when I disengage it, it's getting a little bit crunchy because the next plugin is hit a little bit too hard. But why I use it in the first place is I like to set it so that the snare hits are shaved off a tiny bit. Using clipping lets the snare be more snappy and more punchy than if you would limit it. That's why I like to catch the attacks of the snare by a clipper before going into a final limiter. It just sounds more snappy and more punchy. Next up is a plugin that I own for a really long time. It's Slate FGX. I just love what it's doing. It has a compression section and then it has a kind of, limiter clipping section just to push a mix hard and loud. Let's see what it does.
Just staring at light. I'm trying so hard to make sense of this.
Okay, we are lifting up the gain, the main volume. We are getting a tiny bit of compression from this compressor that is set to like 1.5 to 1. So very, very gentle. And the limiting or clipping section is not doing a lot because we still have one last plugin to go. And the last one is a plugin that I know it for 1 year or something, and it has been living on every mix ever since. It has one section that is a little bit, let's call it like black box section. I don't really know what's going on under the hood, but it's some kind of, compression, saturation, embellishing, EQ stuff. Whatever it is, I like it, what it's doing. And the limiting section that is coming at the very end, I really love it because it has a pretty transparent sound. You can get a really loud mix and it still stays pretty transparent and punchy. Let's see what it does. As you can see, the peaks were already touching 0 dB before I hit that plugin. But now, obviously, they are not going above 0 dB. That's impossible. But the general volume is really increasing by at least the double amount. And the mix still stays transparent. Whoever programmed this did a very good job, and I really love it. That was everything that we had on the master bus, which is quite a bit. But my thinking behind it is maybe accept this massive passive who is doing really quite drastic change. Every little piece of equipment in this chain does a tiny bit of something. So instead of having one compressor doing a ton, I have like 3-4 compressors doing a tiny little bit each one, and it sums up to something big, but without having this very obvious compression going on. Alright, now let's have a look at all the effect returns, which means all the reverbs, the delays, and the special effects. I usually set up a whole bunch of reverbs, delays, and whatever comes to my mind before I even start mixing. So this is like when you're cooking a meal and you already have like salt and pepper and spices all ready at hand, just in case that you think, I want to add a little bit of this and that. So while I'm in the process of mixing and try to go a little bit intuitively, I don't want to have to look for more plugins and stuff as I necessarily need. So everything is already set up. And if I think like a little bit of room or something, it's already there. And I just need to put a send and send something to this return. Now let's have a look at what we have set up. And let me see if I can give you some examples of what every little thing sounds like. Okay, the first plugin that we have is actually not really a plugin, but it's a hardware insert. It's a Bricasti M7 reverb that is sitting here in my rack, and 99% of the time I have set it to exactly one setting, which is Studio A. It's emulating a studio room. It just helps giving a dry signal, a kind of, realistic ambience in which it's sitting. Let me see if I can show you this. Let's take this vocal, for example.
I'm just staring at me. I'm trying so hard to make sense of this.
As you can hear, this is a pretty short room setting. It's just opening up a stage and separates the dry signal from the speaker and just puts it somehow into the room. Next up is EMT 250. The original is, I think, from the 70s, and I think it was the first or one of the first digital reverbs ever. It's like a big box with big handles that are emulated on the display of this plugin. I've set it to 1.8 seconds, so not too long, because this is a pretty quick song and I don't want a washy reverb that is just diffusing everything. Let's see what this sounds like. Okay, let's take the vocal again. I didn't use it on the vocal, but just to see what it sounds like.
I'm just staring at me. I'm trying so hard to make
So this is longer than the Bricasti, but yeah, it is just a different flavor. In case I want something longer and a little bit larger, I'll grab this one. Before hitting the actual reverb plugin, I have this EQ up front, which is cutting off the high end and the low end going into the reverb. What this does is it's preventing the reverb from getting too boomy and building up low end, and you don't have this splashing high end that you may end up having if you don't EQ a little bit going into the reverb. Let's see what the vocal sounds like if I have this EQ on and if I have it off. I now put an exaggerated amount of reverb just to show what this is doing. And if I bypass this, maybe you hear that the S is getting, they're getting splashy in the reverb. I don't want all of this. And now if I would feed in a bass or something into the reverb, which you don't do that often, but sometimes it's nice, you cannot really do it if you have all the low end going into the reverb. This is just going to be a complete mess. But if you cut off the low end, you can add some ambience to even a bass without getting a lot of mud down there. Next is an 8th delay. I love Echo Boys delays. They are just really fine. Here also we have some low cut and high cut going so that the actual echoes of that delay are not exact copies of the original, but a little bit filtered and get darker with each repetition. Let's see what this sounds like. Up, we take the vocal again.
I'm just staring at me. I'm trying so hard to make sense of this.
What delays do really well is they keep your dry signal in front and open up a stage behind. So everything stays in your face and you get some kind of space and a sense of depth behind the signal. Next up we have a dotted 8th delay. I used Valhalla delay. Let's see what this delay is doing for our vocal, if we would use it on the vocal.
I'm just staring at me. I'm trying so hard to.
I love dotted 8th delays. They are not so straight like 8th or quarter delays, and they blend a little bit better in the music sometimes. What Valhalla delay does really nicely is this diffuse button, because it's changing like very echoes to a little bit more diffuse, and they lose a little bit of attack. Let me show you what happens if I reduce this diffusion amount or if I put it in. This is with some diffusion, and now if I switch it off, you can hear the repetitions are far more accurate, a little bit like the original is a ja ja ja. And if I exaggerate the diffusion amount, it's getting more washy, a little bit as if you would feed the delay into a reverb, which is probably what's going on under the hood, but you lose those sharp attacks. So if you want a delay that is softer than a regular delay, maybe this Valhalla delay with this diffusion setting is something for you. Okay, up next we have two like more effect delays. Both times I used Timeless from FabFilter, and they are heavily modulated delays. Let's see what these two do. Let's have a look at the first one. I use the vocal again.
I'm just staring at me. I'm trying so hard to make sense of this.
Yeah, this is basically more like a stereo making thing. It's just adding some thickness to a signal and a little bit of width. So these are very, very short settings. The delay time is like 11 milliseconds, so very short, but the modulation keeps it from getting too phasey. So it's not like a one-to-one copy that you just delay a little bit, but it's modulating all the time. That's why you can apply it to a signal without getting a too phasey signal. Okay, the next one is again Timeless. Let's see what this one does.
I'm just staring at me. I'm trying.
Yeah, this is a weird ping-pongy thing. It's more like building density and getting some movement going more than any real spatial information. And finally, we have the doubler. I really love this a little bit like the first timeless delay. It's to add some width to a signal. So basically what it's doing is taking the dry signal, detuning one side, tuning up the other side, and putting a tiny delay. This is like 6 cent up one side, 6 cent down the other side, and the delay is 10 and 25 milliseconds each. So it's really just like putting a little bit of spread on whatever you feed into. Let's see what this sounds like.
I bet you're staring at me. I'm trying so hard to make sense of this.
As you can hear, it's just getting wider. You should never really exaggerate this kind of effects because it's going to get obvious and maybe it will sound a little bit weird. But tiny amounts of each of these and your signal gets bigger and more spacious and more spacious. This were all the effects that were used on this track. The only last effect return that I have is a signal generator. I just use this to check if my analog gear is balanced so that one side is not louder than the other and each side has the same amount of gain reduction. It's just to make sure that I didn't mess up any setting on the actual analog gear. Let me see. Yeah, on the drums I have a little reverb, very short reverb. I will show you this when we come to the drums. These were all the effects used. Yeah, I hope there's something useful for you in there.